So the first thing I'm going to do is give you a quick rundown on Photoshop. Alright, so let's start. You've opened Photoshop and you're going to create a new document. So you can click here to create new, or you can go to File, New. From here, you can choose from all the various defaults depending on what type of file you're creating. Generally, I'll go with either photo or print. So let's start with photo. We'll do the default Photoshop size. And here you can customize everything about the new document that you're creating. And also you can see down here, and this is in the more recent versions of Photoshop, they've added all these various mock-ups that you can use as kind of a starting point. So here you can set the name of the document, or you can also save a preset. Here you can set the width and the height of the document, the resolution, and realize this resolution is obviously going to be determined, the resolution works as a multiplier for the width and the height if you have it on inches. If you have it on pixels, the resolution is almost irrelevant because your document size is going to be the pixels that you indicate here. The color mode, you have various options here. Anytime I'm doing a photo composite, I'll always use RGB, and I'll generally start with 8-bit. There are cases where you want to do 16 or 32-bit, but I've generally found that they're few and far between. Okay, background, you can either start with white, black, a color, or transparent. I usually just leave that to default. And you can also assign your color space. Adobe RGB is a good one. Or you can start with the sRGB, whichever one you prefer. Either one of those are fine. I'm going to start with Adobe. And your pixel aspect ratio for virtually all the work you do, unless you're doing something for a film or video, you're going to want to use square pixels. Alright, so there you go. Then you hit create, and you've now created the document. Just quickly, the interface of Photoshop. On the left side, you have all your tools. On the top, you have options for your active tool. And on the right side, you have all your various palettes. The one that you're going to use the most is layers. And generally I have layers, channels, and paths together. Layers is where you're going to stack up the various elements of your composite or of your image. Channels shows you the red, green, blue, and you can also create independent channels to use for making selections. And paths is where you're going to create vector paths that you can use in various ways. Here, these icons indicate a collapsed palette. So if you click on that, the palette will open up. For example, these are actions, that's history. So those are all your palettes. And finally, you have the top menu, which is where you can access various filters and tools and so forth. Many of which you can also access through shortcuts and through various palettes, but this is a way to find all your tools in one place. And also, if you're not familiar with Photoshop, it may be more intuitive to look here. So if you're doing something with a selection, you would go to select. If you want to add a filter, you go here, and so forth. Okay, in terms of shortcuts, Photoshop is very shortcut heavy. If you're good at Photoshop, you will virtually never have to go to any menu item, nor will you ever have to go to any of your palettes, because almost everything in Photoshop has a shortcut. And before we start on the composite, there's a few shortcuts I want you to know. I'm going to run through them relatively quickly. If this is too fast for you, just watch this video again. All right, so let's start with the tools. Each tool has a single letter shortcut. So V is the move tool. And also if you hover over these tools, you'll actually get a little mouse call out there that tells you what the shortcut is. And that's actually true also here. If you go to any of these menu items, you'll see the shortcut on the right here. And when I first started learning Photoshop, I made it a habit of any time I went to a menu item, I would always look at what the shortcut was, not use the menu item, and instead use the shortcut. And that's just a good habit to get into. And even if you have to go up to the menu 10 times before you finally remember what that shortcut is, those will be 10 times well spent. And then every future time will be a lot faster because you're using the shortcuts. So tools, you have the move tool, that's V. You have the marquee tool, that's M. The lasso tool is L. These tools, which are your quick selection and your magic wand, are W. And if you go to preferences, general, you'll see it's actually under tools. Use shift key for tool switching. By default, Photoshop has this on. And what that means is if you're on the wand tool, for example, and you want to go to the quick selection tool, rather than hitting W twice, what you're going to do is hit W and then hit Shift W to get to the other tool. Personally, I prefer just hitting one key and scrolling through the tools associated with that single letter shortcut. So I will turn that off. But that's a personal preference. If you prefer to use the Shift key, just turn that on. There you go. Let's hit OK there. Okay, so that's W. This was originally the magic wand, which is why it's W. And they then added the quick selection tool and also gave that the W shortcut. C is for crop. I is for the eyedropper. All these tools use J, and these are the various machine learning correction tools, so your spot healing, healing brush, patch, content aware, and so forth. You have B for the brush, S for the clone stamp. This is the history brush, which honestly I don't use, but if you do use it, the shortcut is Y. E for eraser, G for gradient. You have these tools. They don't have a shortcut, but you can always add a shortcut, and I will show you in another lesson how to do that. You've got the burn and dodge and the sponge tools, all which use O. You've got the pen tool, which is P, T for the type tool, and then A for the vector selection tool, and then U for the various vector shapes, H for hand, and Z for the magnifying glass. Now, let's go to the marquee tool, and we're going to make a new layer. Now, there's a few ways that you can make a new layer. The first is simply clicking on the new layer icon down here at the bottom of the layers palette. Click on that, you're going to create a new empty layer. You can also, and to get rid of the layer, by the way, I'm going to drag it down to the trash can here. You can also go to Layer, New Layer. That'll create a new layer. And that'll give you a few options like naming the layer, clipping it to the previous layer, which we'll discuss in another lesson. You can color label the layer. This doesn't actually affect the color fill of the layer, it just affects the label over here. And you can also select the blending mode ahead of time. And we'll get into blending modes in other lessons, but just know that you can do that here. And you can also preset the opacity. So let's hit OK there. Again, that's going to create a layer. And we're going to drag that down and throw it in the trash. Okay, so the shortcuts that I want to discuss real quick before we start our actual composite are the shortcuts for filling and the shortcuts for navigating around your canvas. So let's start with filling. In order to fill a layer, you're going to go up to Edit, Fill, and then you can select foreground color, which will fill it with this color here. So this is your foreground, the one that's currently black, and the one that's currently white is your background color. So if I select foreground color and hit OK, it's going to fill the entire layer with black. And if I change my foreground color, which I can do up here in the color palette, or I can click on this and change it here with my color picker. So let's change it to blue and then go to Edit, Fill, Foreground Color, and there you go. We've now filled it with blue. Okay, so to do that without having to go up to the menu, what you're going to do, let's just change this color so you can see it in action, is you're going to hold down Option and hit Delete. Okay, so again, that's Option, Delete. And what that's going to do is it's going to fill the entire layer with your foreground color. Now, let's change our background color to a green. And to fill with the background color, it's the same thing, except for instead of Option, you're going to hold down Command and then Delete. There you go. We've now changed it to our background color. And this is going to come in handy a lot when you're working with masks and you have black and white, and you can change your mask quite easily. And you'll just find generally that you're going to be using that a lot. Okay, one other thing about this tool. If your layer has transparency, and what that means is that the whole layer is not full. So for example, I did that way too fast. I apologize. Okay, so Marquee tool, that's M to get to the Marquee tool. Click, drag to make a selection. You can see the selection with the crawling ants. And then I'm going to invert that selection, select inverse, Shift Command I. So let's do it with the shortcut, Shift Command I. And then I'm going to delete what's in the selection. So simply hit delete. And because I have a feather on my marquee of 20 pixels, you'll see that I've got a feathered edge there. All right, so there you go. Now I just hit V to go back on my move tool, which is kind of my default tool that I like to be on. So there you go. We now have this feathered green ball. It's on its own layer. And if I change the background layer, which I'll do, let's change it to like a dark gray. Again, Option Delete. Well, now you can see our layer real clearly. And what I want to do is I want to change the color of this green ball. But the problem is, so let's change it to pink. If I do Option Delete, it's going to fill in the entire layer rather than just the ball. So let's do Edit Undo, which is Command Z. It's a pretty common shortcut for undo. So what I can do is I can lock the transparency of the layer. So up here in the Layers palette, you'll see Lock, and you can lock the transparency. So if I do that and then do Option Delete, it'll fill in the ball, but it'll fill in without filling in all the transparency because the transparency is locked. The problem with that is if I now go to my brush tool and let's change the color and I want to paint, well, it works, but I can't paint outside here, and that's a bit of a problem. So how do we get around this? Let's do Command Z and then Command Option Z to go back again. So let's turn that lock off. So Option Delete is going to fill it. Shift Option Delete is going to fill it, but it's going to take into account the transparency of the layer. Okay, so let's do that one more time. Shift Option Delete, and that also works with Command Delete, so let's turn it pink. Shift Command Delete. What it's doing is it's filling the layer, but it's taking the transparency of the layer into account. meaning it's respecting that transparency, it's not changing the transparency. Okay, so that's how you fill. One more thing before we get off the filling. So you've got a foreground color and a background color. If you look here, you'll see a little black and white mini foreground background color. If you click on that, it's going to default those colors to a pure black and a pure white. So again, let's make those colors not black and white. That little icon right there will default those to black and white. The shortcut for that, which is another one that you'll use all the time, is D for default. So look at these two colors. I'm going to hit D, and voila, they're black and white. Okay, this little double arrow here switches the foreground and the background color. Okay, so let's say, I just went on the brush, by the way, with the B for brush. And let's right mouse click, make that brush a bit bigger. And in this case, I actually want to lock the transparency of the layer. And we're going to shade this ball a bit. So let's take our opacity on our brush down. And we're just going to shade this ball a bit. Yeah, get a little dimension there. Okay, so the beauty of this is as I'm painting here, well, now I want to start painting the highlight, which is white. So I'm going to hit X, and you'll see here, watch what happens when I hit X. Those two colors switch. So now I can use that, paint in my little highlight here, maybe a little rim down there. Yeah, it's not as nice as I'd like it to be. Hit X again. Oh, you get the idea. Okay, and that works amazingly well when you're doing masks or anything where you need to regularly switch those two colors. Okay, so again, X to switch the colors, D to default to black and white. Okay, the last thing I want to cover, second to last actually, is navigation. So the hand and the magnifying glass is what you use to navigate around your canvas. So let's go in the magnifying glass and let's zoom in, and you'll notice I have scrubby zoom turned on. And scrubby zoom means I can click and drag left or right or up and down. Actually, it works best left and right to zoom out or zoom in. If you don't have that on, magnifying glass is going to click to zoom in, hold Option and click to zoom out, or you can make a little window around what area of the image you want zoomed into. This used to be the default behavior of Photoshop. They added scrubby zoom, I believe, with CC. So again, it's strictly preference. I prefer having scrubby zoom. It just is easier and you have more control over how you're zooming, so I tend to use it. But if you don't like it, turn it off. Okay, when you're zoomed in, if you want to zoom and see the whole image, so basically you want to fit on screen, the shortcut for that is Command 0. Okay, so Command 0, it's now going to fit your image in your screen. Okay, so let's zoom in a little bit here. Now, the hand tool. What the hand tool does is it moves your canvas around. It's not actually like moving any layers. It's not moving the ball. All it's doing is moving the canvas around so I can work on a different area of the canvas. Okay, so now let's go back to the move tool. So I'm going to hit V. If every time you had to move or zoom in, you had to come to the tools palette and change your tool, that would be a bit cumbersome. So fortunately, Photoshop has built in some shortcuts that are accessible no matter what tool you're on. And that is the spacebar for the hand and spacebar and Command for the zoom. And because the Command spacebar brings up Spotlight on a Mac. I generally push the spacebar first, then Command to avoid that problem. Okay, so spacebar is your hand, spacebar Command is your zoom, and if you're not using scrubby zoom, spacebar Command Option is zooming out. Without the option, just spacebar and Command to zoom in. Okay, and the last shortcut I want to discuss is when you do have a selection of any kind and you want to drop that selection, the shortcut is Command D. That's a shortcut I'll use very often. So Command D will just drop the selection, meaning you have no active selection. Okay, so that's kind of your 101 on Photoshop. And now we're ready to start on the actual composite.